Dave, did you know that there was a Lord of the Rings movie that came out in 1978 that was an animated film created by Ralph Bakshi?
I did, because we watched it last night together.
Did we?
Yeah, we did.
I nearly completely forgot about that. But yeah, that was very, very good.
Yeah, was it?
Well, we'll get into it.
Yeah, we'll discuss that now.
So this is it was a fan favourite back in the day. It's kind of a bit of a cult classic. Maybe I should say more cult classic rather than a fan favourite. But and it did kind of divide opinions. But this is a movie that some might say inspired Peter Jackson's trilogy of movies. But Dave and I watched it last night. We watched it so that you don't have to.
Yes.
And we're going to get into it today. Everything that's good and bad and all in between. So what do we know about this movie? The first thing, well, Dave, if you asked me about this film before we'd watched it, the first thing that sprang to my mind was the iconic movie poster. Do you know?
Yeah.
Do you know the image I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think long before I knew that this was a movie. By the way, I don't know, did we mention that it's a cartoon, in case we didn't make that clear? But yeah, cartoon movie in 1978. But that iconic poster of Gandalf holding a big, huge broadsword, and the shot is almost from the bottom of the sword up.
Yeah.
It's just an iconic picture, but I didn't really know it was a movie, or didn't know long ago. I've heard of this movie, like loads over the years, but we never got a chance to actually watch it. So
that's right.
Finally, we've done it.
Yeah, but again, for some reason, I just saw this poster over the years, and I see it in different settings. I'd always kind of just glance and be like, that looks class, but I never knew it was actually for a movie. I was like, oh, maybe it's just some artwork or something. But yeah, I suppose that kind of was the first thing that piqued my interest.
Yeah, but the rest of the animation is nothing like this poster.
Oh yeah. The poster is the best animation.
Proper catfish, like.
Gotcha. So that's the first thing that I remembered about this movie anyways. But the second thing, I suppose, the second thing that we should note about this movie is that it's created by Ralph Bakshi, and he did it on the first two Lord of the Rings books. Would you like to enlighten our listeners on anything to do with that, Dave?
Yeah, I think, now I mentioned this to you last night. By the way, we haven't spoken about this at all since we watched the movie, so we said we'll wait until the podcast.
We'll sleep on it.
Yeah, we'll sleep on it and see what our thoughts are. But
also, we finished watching it at like 1 a.m, so we're like, we're not going to record
yeah, that's very true. I think what happened was, from memory, I think the first movie that was created was the Rankin Bass cartoon of The Hobbit. I could be wrong. Yeah. But then I think after that, Ralph Bakshi was able to create this movie that encapsulated the first two books of The Lord of the Rings. And then I don't know what happened. At the end, did they just kind of fall out of budget or something? Because that's what it feels like. And he kind of half set up for a sequel that was going to be The Return of the King, but it never happened. And then Rankin Bass came back in and made another movie that was just called The Return of the King. That's what I think happened, but maybe you can enlighten me.
I can enlighten you a little bit, because I know loads of information because I'm really smart and I can access Wikipedia. So talking about the cancelled sequels that were supposed to feature, so it says here, from reading from Wikipedia, the film was originally intended to be distributed as The Lord of the Rings Part 1. Initially, a trilogy was planned, but this was revised to 2 planned films because of the limited budget. Arthur Krim resigned from United Artists and was replaced by Andy Albeck, according to Bakshi. When he completed the films, United Artists executives told him that they were planning to release the film without indicating that a sequel would follow, because they felt that audiences would not pay to see half a film. And Bakshi stated that he strongly opposed this and agreed with the shocked viewers who complained that the film was unfinished. In his view, quote, had it said Part 1, I think everyone would have respected it. So then, although United Artists found that the film, while financially successful, failed to overwhelm audiences, Bakshi began working on a sequel and even had some B-roll footage shot. The film book of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, published by Ballantine Books on October 12, 1978, still referred to the sequel in the book's inside cover jacket. Indeed, in interviews, Bakshi talked about doing a Part 2 film, picking up where this leaves off, and even boasted that the second film could pick up on sequences that we missed in the first book. And Zentz, not sure who he is, went so far as to try to stop Rankin Bass's The Return of the King TV special, which was already storyboarded before Bakshi's film came out, from airing, so as not to clash with Bakshi's sequel. So again, what David mentioned a moment ago with the Hobbit film, that was by this other production company, Rankin Bass, and they had released the Hobbit, and then they kind of just did the Hobbit and jumped straight to the Return of the King. They just kind of, I remember we did a review a couple of years ago on Rankin Bass's The Return of the King, and we were kind of in a similar point to where we are now. We didn't really know what was going on. We were like, so did they kind of just go, we'll do the Hobbit, you guys do the first 2 books, and then we'll finish it off. But they were actually not like working in cahoots. They were kind of rivals. And I think Bakshi kind of went Ralph Bakshi crazy on these guys, and he kind of tried to cancel them. And I think like he's good at like throwing a bit of shit over the years. Bakshi, he kind of like threw a bit of shade towards Peter Jackson at one point.
Oh really?
Yeah,
like what, in interviews or something?
Yeah, he was like, I think I'll might get into that a bit later on, but I think he kind of said that, you know, he was a bigger inspiration to Jackson, and Jackson didn't really give him the credit for...
Denies it a bit, right.
Not that he denies it, but he was like, he should be like, you know, praising me publicly all the time in his interviews and saying like, and like he was kind of saying like, you know, mine was the real heart of Tolkien, whereas Jackson's was just big, stupid battle sequences just to sell merchandise and all that kind of stuff.
I would say Jackson, like after watching that, I would say Jackson's captured the heart of everything. Whereas one thing I noticed from this movie, by the way, we probably should get into what our general thoughts are in a second.
Yes,
but like I one thing I would say is they did a lot of very lore accurate stuff, and they lifted things right from the page, but didn't seem to capture any of the meaning of what Tolkien was trying to express. And it seems like Jackson was able to do that in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
It's very true, because while I was watching this movie, loads of like, I was just taking down some notes, and there was loads of like different scenes, and I was kind of going, okay, this scene is truer to the book than Jackson's, and this scene is also truer to the book, as in like what you said, like lifted word for word, and scenes playing out almost exactly as had they been written. But yeah, there was just, Jackson seemed to have more of the essence of Tolkien, or just...
Well, he knew what to drop and what to keep, whereas it just seemed like in this Ralph Bakshi movie, it was like, oh, we'll just drop an entire, I don't know, a couple of scenes here, or omit an explanation of something important, but we'll keep this next 2 scenes completely accurate to the book, or exactly how it played out. Like there were some interesting elements, like obviously seeing Bilbo at the Council of Elrond and little things like that, where you're like, yeah, why did Peter Jackson leave that out?
But then also he kind of just inflated Bilbo's importance at the Council of Elrond, and he was pure like, I guess it's up to old Bilbo again. But
yeah, general thoughts.
Well, before we do that, I just wanted to explain one more thing about this film before we get into our general thoughts, which was the idea of rotoscoping, which is another thing that I suppose is another word that goes hand in hand when you're mentioning this film, and people talk about, oh, have you seen the cartoon, the animated films, and it's always like you can't remember Ralph Bakshi, Rankin Bass, which ones are which, and you kind of go, oh, obviously Rankin Bass is obviously Ralph Bakshi is the ones that uses rotoscoping. Do you want to explain to our listeners what rotoscoping is?
So from my understanding, rotoscoping is a lot of actually shooting in live action, so like shooting on a camera, all these actors making like real performances, and then going back in editing and like actually animating over those actions and movements. So a lot of the movements look kind of realistic, but it translates weird to the page. Or sorry, it translates weird to the screen when you're just seeing animated characters making very loose movements. And
there's also some fully animated characters, but then loads of other characters are rotoscoped.
Well, I think actually in this movie, all the animated characters, like fully animated, their movements are all actually rotoscoped. But then there's a lot of ones that aren't even animated or rotoscoped at all. They're like actually live action people that just have some crazy,
it's been traced
filtered
over. Yeah,
it's not even I think it's just like seriously heavily filtered to make it look like it's animated. And so like most, or maybe they're completely blackened out, like the ring rates, the orcs, and a lot of the men as well, like the men of Bree, the Rohirrim.
The Rohirrim, yeah. There's a scene where they show up and you can see...
It's almost just like...
It's just very weird. Yeah, it's like if they've got an Instagram filter over their faces or something, and then in the same shot you might see 2 hobbits just like bumbling along in front of everyone else, and they're, you know, completely animated, like their proportions are all weird. Sam's head is bigger than his torso, like...
And it's weird seeing like Aragorn going up and hit like an animated Aragorn hitting a live action feckin', it's like Space Jam, like in a way. Like he's there killing a live action orc, and then there's like animated blood. It's so bizarre. Like it's crazy, and then everything's out of proportion. Like the background, there might be steps, and people are like, their foot is covering like 10 steps, and the other foot is like down on the ground, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like,
Bakshi should have like tried to sue Warner Brothers as well for Space Jam. Be like, you didn't give me credit for that. That was my idea.
I feel like he just wants credit for everything, like anything that comes out after him.
So, so rotoscoping is, reading here, it says it's a technique in which scenes are first shot in live action, then traced onto animation cells, and it uses a hybrid of traditional animation and rotoscoped live action footage. And from Wikipedia, I just wanted to read this. It said The Lord of the Rings was released in the United States on November 15th, 1978, and in the United Kingdom on July the 5th, 1979. Although the film received mixed reviews from critics and hostility from disappointed viewers who felt that it was incomplete, it was a financial success. And there was no official sequel to cover the remainder of the story. However, the film has retained a cult following and was a minor inspiration to New Zealand filmmaker Peter Jackson. We'll just get very quickly into our general thoughts, not exactly a rating from 1 to 10 or anything like that, but what was your general takeaway, Dave? Not into too much detail because we'll go into that later.
Well, without going into too much detail, I enjoyed the first half, maybe even the first 3/4, a lot more than the end. The end is barbaric, which we'll talk about. But I think like it's definitely worth watching for any Tolkien fan. Like like I've wanted to watch it for a long time, but I kind of felt like we couldn't because we would have wanted to do a recording on our reactions. So I think it's definitely worth watching. I don't think it's good. I think it's a really bad movie. I'm also like, who the hell is the target audience? Because I know a lot of people said like this is what they grew up watching and this was their first introduction to Tolkien. But like it seems way too much for a child. Like because they lift everything from the page, a lot of the dialogue is so complex and you only kind of resonate with it when you're a Tolkien fan or you know the books. And a lot of the time I was thinking like, if this was just a movie on its own and I never heard of Lord of the Rings, which would have been the case for a lot of children in 1978, I just don't know how you would resonate with it at all. Like it seems...
Yeah, I don't know if it was aimed specifically at children because...
But then who is it aimed for? Like
maybe teenagers? Teenagers, maybe even people in their early 20s, because I think it was kind of like this technique of shooting was so new and out there. It kind of captivated the kind of, the young, cool people that were like, oh, this movie, it's a hybrid of
I think like
animation
the writers, probably Bakshi was completely stoned, probably on, I think he was like a coke addict. So it probably resonated with a lot of druggies as well back in, the 70s. They're like, oh, check out this animation, bro. yeah. But it is very, very 70s in a way. Like the voices, the sound effects.
Oh, the sound. Oh, God.
They kept having that, it's like, it's used a lot now in modern day. The kind of like intensity sound effect, the
yeah,
that kind of thing.
I remember I turned to you at one point in the movie and I just said, I'm so glad that films don't make this kind of soundscape anymore or just have this kind of, like, the way they have the orchestra set up for this kind of situation,
orchestra of 2 instruments, maybe.
No, I think it was quite big. It wasn't as big as initially. They wanted to have hundreds of instruments, hundreds of voices and choirs, but they didn't quite get there. But they still got like a more limited orchestra. But it's a lot of anxious. I get really anxious when I hear some of these. Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Monty Python. The music from Monty Python, but in Monty Python that it's kind of done in a hilarious way where you're not supposed to take it seriously. This was similar, but it was supposed to be very serious.
I think there's a few Monty Python kind of similarities in this. Like I was going to say,
loads.
We'll get into.
So, but just to pick up on what Dave said about just my general overall thoughts. Again, I was not expecting much from this film at all. I was kind of expecting to hate it. And then again, I think we paused the film after the first maybe 45 minutes and I was like, I'm enjoying this way more than I expected to.
Yeah.
And I was really happy about that and I was excited. And again, I did enjoy, similar to you, Dave, at least the first half of the movie. Maybe, as you said, maybe even the first 3/4. The last quarter to the final third,
it's a mess.
It's a mess. The storytelling just goes all over the place. It's like the introduction of new characters of Theoden and all these people, and it's kind of like they just teleport around the place. There's one part where they're just like, oh, now they're in Lothlorien and now they're in Helm's Deep, and it's like there's no explanation. For me, the biggest thing was the lack of explanation of different things. Like, we'll get into that in more detail.
I just don't know how anyone's supposed to follow it. Like a child or a teen or anything. Like you can only barely follow it when you actually know it inside out.
Yeah, exactly. Just to speak about another couple of details from Wikipedia here, speaking about the directing. So Bakshi said that one of the problems with production was that the film was an epic, because epics tend to drag. The biggest challenge was to be true to the book, was a quote from Bakshi. When asked what he was trying to accomplish with the film, Bakshi stated, "The goal was to bring as much quality as possible to the work. I wanted real illustration as opposed to cartoons." He stated that the key thing was not how a Hobbit looks, since everyone has their own idea of such things, but that the energy of Tolkien survives. I can say with my hand on heart that he failed to accomplish that.
He killed the energy of Tolkien in that movie.
And then Bakshi stated that the film presented a clash of many styles, as in his other films. Bakshi was so terrified, this is one other little thing that I tagged on, that Bakshi was so terrified of the horses that were used in the shoot that he directed those scenes from inside a caravan. Which I just found somewhere else.
They did look very scary, actually, a lot of the horses. Anytime they were moving really close to the camera, I was like, my God. That was another thing.
Sitting inside his caravan, be like, and cut.
The camera angles as well were crazy. Like, there was so many times where someone would just be running into the camera or something, and like, but obviously it's rotoscoped or there's a filter on it or something, and you would just see someone's like arse or elbow or something like really close,
taking up the whole screen,
which is so unusual for animation, because everything is animated and it's done exactly like
you're not using complete control over.
Yeah, you're not using a camera normally, but using a camera and animation, the thing was just wild.
Speaking about the animation, so publicity for the film announced that Bakshi had created, quote, the first movie painting by utilizing an entirely new technique in filmmaking. Much of the film used live action footage, which was then rotoscoped to produce an animated look. This saved production costs and gave the animated characters a more realistic look. Reviewer Maria Boylan writes that up to that point, animated films had not depicted extensive battle scenes with hundreds of characters. By using the rotoscope, Bakshi could trace highly complex scenes from live action footage and transform them into animation, thereby taking advantage of the complexity live action film could capture without incurring the exorbitant costs of producing a live action film. So obviously there were benefits to using this rotoscope, and it wasn't just that he was this visionary. He was maybe cutting costs, also trying out some. I think actually after this film he went on to produce like 3 more films, where his next 3 films all use rotoscope as well. And I think he was like really into it. And then later on he looked back and he was like, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I just those like the worst parts of this movie were all the battle sequences.
There was some of them that just really dragged on, and also do you remember like
anytime there was bad guys on screen actually, like, they were always bad. It was overdone. I just felt like we talked about it when we were watching it, that anytime they had a chance to show like the ring rates or the orcs like running away, they just went on way too long, like 5 times the length of how it should have went on. And I just felt like he had so much footage of people dressed up as orcs and run, and he was like, well, I can't just have this as a 2-second shot. I have to put it in for like
one of the other things that I read about it actually when I was reading up on this episode was that they said something like very little of this film ended up on the cutting floor or on the so basically he nearly put everything into the film that he had shot.
Wow.
So it was just
that goes.
You can see that. Yeah. So speaking about the music, which we briefly touched on there a moment ago, it said the film score was composed by Leonard Rosenman, and Bakshi wanted to include music by Led Zeppelin, but producer Sal Zentz insisted upon an orchestral score because he would not be able to release the band's music on his Fantasy Records label. That would have been way better if you just had like Led Zeppelin to the soundtrack.
Oh man, that'd be deadly.
So then Rosenman wanted a large score involving a 100-piece orchestra, 100-piece mixed choir and 100-piece boy choir, but ended up with a smaller ensemble. And Bakshi initially called this score majestic, but later stated that he hated Rosenman's score, which he found to be too cliche.
Oh god. So, I wonder how much smaller it went from.
Yeah, it just said a smaller ensemble.
Yeah,
an ensemble of 2.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's so tinny in the ear when you're listening to it as well.
God, just that one trumpet anytime there was a charge. I just wanted to mention as well how obviously we briefly mentioned Peter Jackson maybe taking inspiration from this, and I think first of all, I think he would have appreciated this movie being a predecessor, because like there are some similar things in terms of, like, when you watch this whole movie, you can go, okay, well, first of all, there's no Tom Bombadil. So it was good to see how that could be cut out. Because I used to always think Peter Jackson was such a genius, how he managed to weave a way of getting Tom out and still getting the story to go. But like, that's been done before already. And just like the general structure of like how they're getting from A to B and introducing new characters. I know it wasn't really done well in this movie, but like, I just think that there was some structure to it. And maybe actually we'll get into, I have a couple of things listed down here of what possibly inspired Jackson, like some things I noted down.
Sure.
Will I run through them now?
Don't run through them now.
Okay.
You hold on to that, because I do want to read a small piece on the influence on Peter Jackson. But I also would agree that the very first thing that happens in the movie is it opens up with this narrated prologue.
Yeah, that was inspiration numero uno.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I was just like, oh wow, this is obviously something that if Peter Jackson sat down and watched this movie, he could be like, that's a good way to just get a big info dump out of the way at the beginning.
Yeah.
And just kind of go, look.
Exposition dump.
Exactly. And just like, here we go. Look, there's the forging of the rings and blah, 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 blah. And then here we are now, we're in the Shire. And that's pretty much how this film started. And so I was very impressed with that. And I was like, okay,
Me too, yeah.
Bakshi obviously...
I wasn't impressed with the animation going on behind it.
No. It was all...
It was like a silhouette, dark room, kind of... Remember Gollum getting the ring up Bilbo, just like dancing around. I was like, what? What is this?
I was very confused. Gollum was so weird. Weird. Before I get to that, however, I wanted to read about the reception and kind of box office and awards and all that kind of stuff. So The Lord of the Rings, it was a financial success. The reports of the budget vary from $4 to $8 million and as high as $12 million, while the film grossed $30.5 million at the North American box office. It thus made a profit, having kept its costs low. Despite this, the reaction from fans was hostile. Jerry Beck writes that they intensely disliked the film's cheap-looking effects and the missing ending, having been misled by the title to expect the film to cover the whole of the book.
Of course.
Pretty much. I mean, I remember the first time I went to see The Fellowship of the Ring, and I didn't know anything about Lord of the Rings, so I just went in, and then the film just ended when it did. And I was like, I was only like 11 at the time or something, so I didn't even understand that this was a part one. And I was like, so that's the end of that film. But I was
that was great.
And then someone was like, there's going to be more. I was like, oh, class. So I was very happy with the way it just rounded off, and it's like, Frodo and Sam, they're going after Mordor. They'll probably complete the task.
They'll probably do it. But Boromir was the main guy, and that was so sad. Exactly. I think as well for this movie, I don't know, do you have any more information on this? But like, it felt like there was no, I know I mentioned there was structure, but I felt like there was no structure in terms of like timing or making the movie into a specific amount of time. They were just like, oh, let's just keep doing the Fellowship of the Ring. And then it felt like the Fellowship went on to like 3/4 of the movie. And then they just shoehorned in a small bit, or like all
just the highlights of the Two Towers.
Yeah, the highlights of Two Towers, like Treebeard is in it for like 10 seconds. It's just really random. And then they're like, yeah, we don't have enough time for Return of the King. Just cut it there and put in some triumphant music at the end. And you're like, oh, I guess this is the end now.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I quite enjoyed all of the Fellowship of the Ring part.
Yeah. And it kind of felt like it was naturally coming to the end when, Boromir dies. And
I think that's what they were saying, like, initially, when I said to you that the initial plan was to make three movies. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, oh no, just make 2 in the first one, and then we'll see if we can get the rights to do a third one, or the go ahead or whatever.
And the entire Two Towers was just like all that horrible live action rotoscoping effect of just the orcs running with Merry and Pippin and fighting the Rohirrim, and then the Battle of Helm's Deep. And that was the majority of the Two Towers, and it was just awful.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was really bad. So the final thing we want to look at before we get into our kind of more of a intense breakdown is the influence on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. So again, this is just taken from Wikipedia. Okay. And it says, the film has been cited as an influence on director Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings film trilogy, although Jackson said that, quote, our film is stylistically very different and the design is different. Jackson remembers Bakshi's films as, again, quote, brave and ambitious attempt. So didn't quite get there. It was an attempt. In another interview, Jackson stated that it had some quaint sequences in Hobbiton, a creepy encounter with the Black Rider on the road, and a few quite good battle scenes, but about halfway through the storytelling becomes very disjointed and it became confusing and incoherent. he and his screenwriter and producer, Fran Walsh, remarked that Bakshi's Treebeard, quote, looked like a talking carrot.
I had that written down as well. I said carrot slash, where did I put it? I have carrot slash turnip. Yeah, I thought it looked like a turnip. It even had like some like bits of shrubbery coming out of it. Yeah, I just thought it looked like a carrot turnip, man.
Yeah, well, there you go. And then it says here, in fact, Jackson did acknowledge Bakshi's film as early as 1998 when he told a worried fan that he hoped to outdo Bakshi, as well as mentioning in the behind-the-scenes feature that, quote, the Black Riders galloping out of Bree was an image I remember very clearly from the Ralph Bakshi film. Do you remember that when they kind of they turn and they gallop and it's all like real life horses running? And actually, I was like, that's quite cool. The way they just kind of,
think that
ran away. So he said that's an image that really stuck with him. And in the audio commentary to The Fellowship of the Ring, Jackson says Bakshi's film introduced him to The Lord of the Rings and inspired me to read the book. So that's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Well, thank God for Bakshi's movies.
I know, exactly.
Imagine if Peter Jackson never read The Lord of the Rings, we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
He'd be dead.
So then in a 2001 interview, he said he enjoyed the film and wanted to know more. That's when he first read it, and that's the first time he watched it, and that inspired him to want to know more, and then to go on to read the books.
Fair.
And on the audio commentary for the DVD release of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Jackson acknowledges one shot, a low angle of a hobbit at Bilbo's birthday party shouting "proud feet" as an intentional homage to Bakshi's film, which Jackson thought was a brilliant angle.
Yeah. So he uses the exact same angle in his movie, and I think I've seen a couple of pictures like that before, just a comparison of the Proudfoot. Is it Odo Proudfoot?
Yeah,
Odo Proudfoot in the movie, in the cartoon, and Peter Jackson's, and like other things like, you know, the Nazgul reaching over the hobbits on the like tree roots thing.
That was very similar as well, except for the fact that he looked like he was a drunk,
he was like a zombie.
He looked like a drunk zombie, just like falling around the place, and like. But I was like, it's not scary like the way it's scary in Peter Jackson's movies.
It's a different type of scary.
But it is scary because he's very zombie-ish almost. Like, you're kind of going, I just need to like walk at a normal pace and he won't be able to catch me because he's just falling over the place on his own.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know. Like suddenly he could have turned into a proper zombie and run after you. Like his... Like I thought it was cool, like two different interpretations of it. Like especially that scene in the book describes how the Nazgul is sniffing, and obviously that features in both the movies as well, Peter Jackson's and Ralph Bakshi's. But like in Ralph Bakshi's, he's like, this is like a deformed creature sniffing, whereas like Jackson's one is like, this is a highly intelligent creature that has, you know, otherworldly abilities,
other senses,
heightened senses, and
I thought visually they were kind of stupid and crap, but I did like how their eyes were just glowing red all the time, cool. And it was kind of just freaky. And they
were inconsistent though. I thought like the Nazgul, like when we first saw them, they were kind of, you know, limbs flailing and looked all zombie like, and then later when we see them in Bree, they looked like they were able to stand up straight, tall, and swipe away. Like I couldn't imagine the creature using a sword the first time I saw him, but then like at Bree and at Weathertop, I just thought they were a lot more astute. I don't know, it was like they ditched that zombie idea altogether. It was interesting.
Very good. So getting into our actual kind of we're not going to break down scene by scene, but we're going to, you know, say, okay, here's what happens at the first part and then move on. So as we already mentioned, that the movie opens up with this big with this prologue. It's quite similar to Galadriel's narration in the start of Peter Jackson's films. So it was quite nice to see that and see like, okay, it's quite a good way to set up this film. I feel like a movie like Lord of the Rings, it needs the viewer to kind of get a lot of information before we actually start into the movie. So that was quite good. And then we get to see Bilbo's speech. And again, one thing that I noted from that was just some of the similar quotes that were taken directly from the pages that like they featured in both this film and then also in Peter Jackson's film. And so that was quite nice. Yeah. It was quite nice to see.
Yeah, I enjoyed a lot of the start of the movie, especially like seeing it was much more rushed than Peter Jackson's, but good stuff.
Then the next note that I'd made was the narration of then 17 years passed, which again, something that was left out of Peter Jackson's films, but just letting people know that Bilbo disappears, goes off on his adventures, and then 17 years pass, and then obviously that's where the story really picks up again in chapter 2, with Frodo having owned the ring for a long time. You get this real sense that Frodo, like, it makes more sense that when Gandalf comes back and Frodo's already slightly getting attached to the ring because he's been the owner of it for a long time. So we get that, and then also we get the introduction of some of the other hobbits, but it's very clearly established, and a lot more so in this, and again, maybe for different reasons, that Frodo is obviously a little bit older, wiser, higher ranking, and
taller as well.
Taller, yeah. He's just more imposing, and he's just... I said it to you as well at one point. I was like, Frodo's always calm.
Yeah.
Like the whole way through the thing, he's chill.
Yeah, it's just interesting because we did do an episode on Frodo, like the difference between him in the book and Peter Jackson's movie, and I definitely would have thought this Frodo, not saying he's better than Elijah Wood in any way, but he's definitely more similar to the Frodo on the pages of Tolkien's books. Like he's just, like even when he's stabbed, he's not like falling all over the place. He's still able to like talk and resist the Witch King and Nazgul, you know.
You get a lot more heroic Frodo moments in this film than you do in Jackson's, I think. And you see, like, when at the Ford of Isen, when the ring wraiths are trying to, you know, capture him, and there's the big flood. You see him kind of trying to resist, and he's saying like, "Go back to Mordor," and they're shouting like, "Come back, where we will take you with us to Mordor," and all that kind of. And like he's been stabbed and he's on death's door, but he still like pulls out his sword and he's up on the back of the horse. And he's like
pulls out a sword a lot more in this movie.
He does. He does indeed. Then we get, obviously, when I said they show 17 years pass, and then there's a knock on the door, and it's Gandalf, and Frodo's like, "Oh my God, Gandalf, I haven't seen you in ages." And Gandalf's like, "It's been 17 years." So they kind of really like enforce that. And then Gandalf's explaining to Frodo about the ring. They have that sequence of him just chucking the ring in the fire and all that. And again, I thought that was quite well done. And then even Gandalf has a little bit of black speech in Hobbiton. Keep going. No, good job, yeah. So that was kind of cool as well. So in general, for me, I thought these opening scenes, I was like, these are a lot like more just true to the book almost than Jackson's, and I quite enjoyed them.
I think it's a lot easier to translate that from the book as well, because these are the only characters you're introduced to. It's going at a slower pace. I also thought it was funny Frodo has a little dig at Gandalf, where Gandalf's like, you haven't aged today in all this time, and he's like, and you look much older. Something like that. I was like, oh, okay, you say that.
Yeah, that was funny. So then we're done in the Shire, and they do also mention the whole, okay, you need to go and pretend that you're moving house. So he has to go off, and they're like, and he says you should pretend that you're going off to go and live with your cousins, Merry and Pippin. Then the next thing I had written down was just Gandalf versus Sauron, or
Aruman, yeah. Well, before that, I just want to say that Sam appears, and he's like proper Simple Sam, like Simple Jack from Tropic Thunder. He's probably like, "Ugh." And the funniest thing, I think I'd seen this before on YouTube, but it was just so random where Gandalf pulls him out of the bush, he's talking to him a bit, and he's kind of like, "Confounded you, Samwise Gamgee, blah, blah, blah." And then just before Gandalf leaves, he just kind of goes, "Ugh," and just kind of like just kind of freaks Sam out. Sam's like, "Whoa!" So he just like waves his hands at his face and like gives him a little jump. But yeah, the pronunciation of Aruman was a bit ridiculous. I have a couple of other.
So yeah, well, just explain that to the audience.
Yeah, so I picked it up immediately the first time. Gandalf walks in to Saruman's, to his tower, and he's just basically like, "Greetings, Aruman," or something like that. But like, I think
"Greetings, Aruman."
Exactly.
Yeah,
like whatever.
There's a couple of times it was difficult to pick up on if he'd actually made a mistake.
Yeah, like whatever the last letter of the word before Saruman, I think it might have been an S. So I was like, "Aruman." Maybe I just heard that wrong. And then it was said again, and you picked it up.
Yeah, loads.
And then after
then you'd have some character like Theoden or a Gandalf. But like in the same scene, they might twice say Aruman, and then the next moment they'll be like Sauron. You're like, do these actors that are the people that are doing the voice, are they forgetting his name or not reading it rightly?
It's a weird mistake to make, because like we can look at some other pronunciations. I have a couple of things here, and like I can understand why. Okay, so I'll just read some out. So we have Balin instead of Balin. You can understand that. Sorry. We've Minas Tirith, which we've heard before in another cartoon.
Grima,
Wormtongue. We've Aedoros, which I can
Aedoros.
I can understand that instead of Edoras. Yeah. And then like do you remember what you heard for Mellon? I heard like Mechlin or something. It was like Mechlin.
I thought it was like Mejlin or something like
whatever it was. But to be fair, in Peter Jackson's movie, I always thought he said Berlock.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
like-
I picked up that before as well. Like,
Yeah.
many times before I knew he said Mellon. I was like,
But yeah, the
Lord.
whole Ahriman thing, yeah,
That was really weird.
It was very strange. If anyone knows what the hell was going on there, because I couldn't find anything.
Tell us a little bit about Gandalf versus Sauron.
Yeah, Gandalf versus Saruman, or Ahriman was cool to see Ahriman of many colors.
Yeah.
Which was, or of many others. Or I was just dropping the first letter for everything now. I don't know. Yeah, that was kind of weird. It was like two really old senile men slowly walking up a stairs.
My beard is longer than your beard.
And Saruman just leaving Gandalf on a higher step and slowly walking
He slowly
down.
wobbles down.
And Gandalf like, no!
You'll pay for this, Ahriman.
Yes.
He just literally, like, it's like he guides him to a room and then turns around and walks away at the speed, like the opposite of the speed of light. Just like the speed of snail. And Gandalf just stands there and doesn't move. Like, he could just walk down beside him and be like, I'm coming with you. But also, do you remember how out of proportion the size of Saruman's staff?
Yeah.
It looked like he was holding this giant plank of wood.
Yeah, it's just a big 4x4.
Yeah.
That was pretty nuts.
I'm going down to do some construction work here now. I'm going to carry this plank of wood.
But also, it just seemed so awkward because the scene, I don't think it had any music or anything. And it was like, no, Saruman, don't you dare leave me here. And he just like slowly steps away and no one else talks. And you just hear, but there's no other sound. He's just walking
But then
away.
suddenly there's a bit of like a whoosh, and suddenly Gandalf is just on the top of this tower.
That was kind of cool.
The tower looked cool.
Yeah, the tower looked cool.
It
And
wasn't
the way
just this big, tall, thin black tower.
He was just magicked there, which looked kind of cool. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Also, by the way, Simple Sam looks like a babushka. I wanted to put that in there. He looks like an old Russian granny or something. Like he just,
he does.
just looks like I don't know. You've never seen Orange is the New Black, no?
No.
Like Red, one of the characters from that. She's like the mother babushka. Kind of looks like Sam.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very good. Then obviously we get to see something that we've already spoken about quickly, which was the Nazgul on the road. And I just wrote down it was very cartoonish ghoul and just looked like something out of Scooby-Doo kind of thing.
Yeah,
just kind
a
of
bit, yeah.
falling around. And but you know, we've already spoken about that. But basically just the sounds and the movements of this Nazgul were just, again, I was going to say they're not scary, but they were kind of scary. They're just, but like very different kind of scary, like just weird and kind of like, oh god, it's kind of, I don't know, creepy zombie, as you kind of said before as well.
Definitely freaky if it's for a child watching it.
And then we could jump to the prancing pony. Any notes you want to say on that?
The only thing I noted was that I thought the scene was quite fun. You do see a lot of stuff from the book as well, like Frodo's...
The cow jumped over the moon.
Frodo's
song.
Yeah. Well, does Frodo sing that song? Or?
Yeah, he does.
Okay, well,
I
was going to say he gets up and sings a song. He sings a song about the Shire. Does he mention the cow jumped over the moon?
No, he does. Yeah, no, because he sings a song and it's about. He's like, that song is about an inn where people used to go drinking, and then there's something about the cow jumping over the moon. But it's a very like drawn out and long. Like there's about 5 or 6 verses that are written all in the book.
Page of the book, like
or a page and a half, and it's like it's a good song.
Yeah.
And then basically he sings, like in the book, he sings this song because there's no internet, there's no newspapers back in Middle Earth. So anytime there's travelers that have come to like the Prancing Pony from a different area, they're like, oh, we want you to bring us some news, and news is always in the form of like a song or a poem or something. So they're like, oh, can you please sing us a song? And he kind of gets up and he doesn't sing one that's like informative of news, but he's like, oh, I remember a song, I think it was one of Bilbo's songs about, and it comes to him in the moment because it's about being in an inn. And he's like, oh, well, here we are in the Prancing Pony. And he's like, I don't know why. And afterwards he says, I don't know why that song came to me, but I suppose it's because we were in this inn. But he sings the song, and everyone in the Prancing Pony, this is the book, everyone loves the song, and they ask him to repeat it and sing it again. And it's a really long song, and so he cracks into it again. And they also say it was in a melody that was already familiar to the people of Bree. So they knew the melody already. There was just the words, and it also said that these people were very fast at picking up on lyrics. So by the second time he was singing the song, they're all joining in and singing along with them. Yeah, and then when it gets to the part where he does he gets the cow jumped over the moon, he does this big leap on the table, and he comes crashing down and falls over, and that's how the whole thing goes tits up, really. So we did get we got more or less that in this as well.
He does fall over and goes invisible, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And then Butterbur is like, "You're scaring my guests."
He was a bit more of a dick, Butterbur, in this, I thought.
Maybe.
But yeah, I thought the Prancing Pony in general was kind of like Tortuga scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean, just people kind of falling over and like drinking and violins playing, and but the rotoscoping in that was the first time we really saw it properly. And it was just, you'd see one guy, live action guy, that was so close to the camera, another guy that was smaller. Then you'd actually see like a little person that was being rotoscoped in, and they just, was this supposed to be a big hobbit? And it was so bizarre, like.
Yeah, it was very weird. We got like then also outside of the Prancing Pony on the street, we get to see another thing that did happen in the book that we didn't see in Peter Jackson's was, which was Merry goes out, he leaves, he's not involved actually of anything that's happening in the Prancing Pony. He goes out for a walk, and he gets like come upon by these two black riders, and they kind of put him under the black breath, which is like just they kind of breathe on him,
stinky breath,
and he just passes out of the fumes. And but in the book, I can't remember who it is. I think it's Butterbur has a little, like it's a hobbit or dwarf helper.
He has hobbit
helpers, and he sends them off to go looking for something outside. And it's in the book, it's this helper who comes upon Merry, who's just kind of dismayed, and he's just like in the middle of the road, and he sees these two figures creeping and like leaning over the body, and he kind of shouts, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on there?" And he runs towards them, and the Nazgul kind of just run away, and they're like, "Oh, get out of here." I don't know why the two Nazgul are afraid of the little hobbit that's coming, but anyway, that's the way it happens in the book. Maybe they just don't want to be seen. In this one, the Nazgul just kind of like attack him, they put him unconscious, and then they just leave of their own accord. And he's just like unconscious in the middle of the road. But he does show kind of courage and strength. And I also remember that before we even came to Bree and to the Prancing Pony, there was a part where Merry had this big long like speech, and I remember just writing down saying that again, Merry's character, again true to the book, how he's quite he's very independent, and he's very courageous and very knowledgeable about just the world around him. He's very good with geography and things like that. So that did come across quite well.
He mentions that to Pippin when they end up in Fangorn Forest. He says like, "Oh, you shouldn't have been wasting your time in Rivendell playing. You should have been like studying maps."
Not in Rivendell, but in the Shire.
No, I think he says in Rivendell.
I thought he was just saying like, as a young hobbit, you shouldn't have been playing.
No, I think he was just talking about like, I thought it was because they just left Rivendell. They were there for a while, not just left, but I thought he said something about like in Rivendell you shouldn't have been playing around. You should have been like studying up on maps. But I don't know. Maybe he said the Shire.
I thought he was just saying like, in your youth, in those couple of days. I thought you meant like in general, you're just a kind of a boyish, playful hobbit, and you should be.
I just thought like it was because they had come to this place, and maybe Merry was off like trying to figure out what's at stake on their journey ahead, whereas Pippin was like, "Oh, where's the alcohol at?" But who knows? Either way,
I agree with Pippin on that one.
Mary was wise.
Mary was wise. Then we get to meet Strider for the first time, and I remember turning to you and just saying, "Strider looks like a prostitute."
Yeah, not just like in his movements, but just like having his long, beautiful, naked legs.
Why were all the warriors just wearing miniskirts?
Boromir too, yeah, and there was a couple of upskirt shots as well. With Aragorn would be legging it. And literally, he'd be legging it, and you would just see like up his kilt, and you're like,
again, like you said, the angle is nothing like you've seen in a cartoon before. So like because of the rotoscoping, I suppose. So like you could have a shot where, very often in cartoons they're moving across the screen laterally from like a left to right position or something like that. Whereas in this, a lot of it was like coming from distance towards the camera, and so you could have these scenes where Aragorn was just like running, and his running is so erratic, and he's kind of bumbling and falling and tripping,
doing some dune sand walking.
Yeah, because I think a lot of those scenes, those rotoscoping scenes, were shot. Either I think they shot a lot of in Spain, and then they shot a lot of them in these big huge like sound screen areas.
I was going to say it looked like they were in the volume or some small area where they had to do some kind of crazy.
But it's almost like the actor in his head was like, "Oh, I imagine there's going to be like
rocks.
I'm jumping from one rock to the next rock, and here there's going to be something in my way. I need to jump this way." And then when they just put it on screen, it was just this like flat ground. He's just running and zigzagging for absolutely no reason.
Yeah,
but then, like he comes towards the front screen. It comes like where the camera would have been set up, and he just like runs over the camera, and you get this like upskirt look. You're like, do I shield my eyes,
or do I pause?
We zoomed in.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, you know, we got to break it down accurately, properly, scene by scene. Though. Also, his hairstyle looked like our mum's.
Oh, his hair was awful. Yeah,
but and like
who else had like short hair that just looked crap? I'm trying to remember. Someone
Elrond. Elrond was like,
yeah, but I've seen Elrond before. I've seen,
but he looked terrible.
Yeah,
when we see him,
we've definitely on Twitter put up memes before of like the different types of Elronds, like the one from,
I know, but it just still blew me away. I knew who it was, and I was like,
I definitely prefer the Elrond from Rankin Bass.
Oh yeah, he looks more.
Do you remember he had that like because Elrond's described as having a circlet of silver, and in the Rankin Bass one it was like magical, and it like it was like floating around his head or something. Yeah, it was kind of cool.
That was cool, and he had a beard though, which was kind of weird. I think he had a big long like goatee type beard.
That's not very Tolkien, no,
Círdan,
because he's not Círdan.
Yeah, well, he still looked a lot cooler and a lot wiser. This guy just looked like, I don't know, I couldn't describe it. He looked like a background character in like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves or something.
He just looked so average.
So, yeah, whatever. But anyways...
so mid.
Yeah, so mid, yeah. We get Strider, and he's a little rap battle with Butterbur as well.
Like, again, we do get some of the scenes which are similar to the book, whereas, for example, Strider kind of goes into the room with the hobbits, and then he hides behind a door when Butterbur comes in, and Butterbur is like, I wouldn't take up with that Strider now if I were you. And Aragorn just like behind the door, he steps out, he's like, ha, here I am. It's like, I've been eavesdropping or whatever. And then Butterbur's like, oh my God. So that happens. But then also another thing that happens in the book, and then they kind of like halved it here, was Aragorn is like,
oh yeah,
he pulls out the sword that's broken, and he just like pulls out and goes, haha, look at this. And like, again, it's not broken at the hilt. It's like 90% of the sword is intact, and then just the top 10% of it just be like snapped off the top. And he's like, behold, and he just shows them the sword, and they're like, yeah, are you going to kill us with that sword?
Yeah,
and
this is when they're not sure whether to trust him or not. And he's like, I'll prove whether I am. And he pulls out a sword really threateningly.
And there's no explanation whatsoever, obviously.
And then they like probably start applauding or something.
No, I can't remember. I think it just cuts to the next scene. And I was like, what are the viewers supposed to think about that? Because
is
obviously,
he going to kill them?
Just to anybody who doesn't know, in the books, this does happen that they're not sure if they should trust Aragorn or not. He's introduced himself as Strider. They're like, because he actually says to them, he invites himself on their quest, and he says, you need to decide whether or not to take me, but I want to guide you to wherever you need to go. And Sam's very much against it, and he's like, don't take him, I don't like him at all. And then Aragorn pulls out the broken sword, and he says to Sam, I think it is, he says, you see, not much of a weapon, is it? And he kind of, so he's saying like, look, I can't, so obviously it's broken way more down at the hilt, there's hardly any blade, and he kind of just shows him the sword and says, look, I can't really fight you with the sword. It's not up to much of the sword. But he also used it kind of like as his passport to say like, look, I'm actually,
it's identity.
It's like his ID card. Yeah, he's like, look, I'm Aragorn, I'm whoever, and this is I'm carrying around the blade that was broken. And blah, blah.
He does do that at the Council of Elrond as well, which is
he does later. But I was saying, like the hobbits in that moment, they're like, what's this dude showing us the sword for? So
yeah, true. I think. I just want to put in a few things that I thought could have been Jackson inspirations. Like we already mentioned the prologue and the Black Rider tree scene. But I thought something that was interesting as well, just the casting of Frodo as well, being a juvenile character. Like obviously he's a bit more wise, but you could definitely tell this was like kind of a childlike character. I thought that was interesting, how it's not just like a 50-year-old man shortened.
Sure. Yeah.
I also thought, like we mentioned, Strider and Bree in general, like obviously you see the introduction of Strider is very similar. And one of the next scenes as well is the Nazgul bed scene, which like plays out very similarly to Jackson's as well, where they sneak in.
It's true. Yeah,
thought that was very. And then the last two. Well, obviously we have Weathertop in this, which is similar again. But the one interesting thing is when Frodo puts on the ring and he's in the Wraith world. I thought it was quite similar how the whole screen changes and it's all like slow-mo. And do you remember like Aragorn's there and he's like, take off the ring, Frodo, or whatever, and then it flashes to Frodo and he's all in like this slow-mo Wraith world, and it's very similar to Peter Jackson's. So I don't know if they are real inspirations, but like they are things that happen to be similar that
Yeah.
Could have been different.
Yeah, there were some things that were quite similar, and there were some things that I enjoyed quite a lot. Like I liked when Frodo put on the ring, that suddenly, like for him, even he could see the Nazgul clearly, but he couldn't see Aragorn, and like Aragorn started to disappear, and like the normal world started to like fade away, and he could see the Nazgul more clearly and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, as you said correctly, we get that Nazgul scene where they're attacking the beds. One thing I did note about that was instead of them like using the points of their swords and stabbing, they were just like whacking like with the edges of their swords onto the beds. I was like, that's not the best technique, I don't think, but sure, no. we won't think about that too much. And then obviously we get to see the Nazgul flee, as we said, we mentioned that already before. And I remember like making a note just saying like that's like one of the best uses of that kind of realistic rotoscoping.
Especially because they were all close together, the horses.
Yeah, and then it was interesting then this morning when I was just doing a bit of research where it said that Peter Jackson, like that was an image that stayed with him of the horses just like all galloping away into the night, and that was quite cool. And yes, then as we said, Weathertop, we get to see Strider. He's like invisible to the Nazgul, they can't really see him. And again, that's quite good because we don't really get much of from Peter Jackson's movies. We don't really get an idea of what the Nazgul are able to see and what they're not able to see. In the books, it's very much like the Nazgul are almost blind. They can't really see much at all. Obviously, then when Frodo puts the ring on, they're like, "Oh, there he is."
Yeah, they're using their sense of smell, and
they use much more sense of smell, and they kind of. The hobbits kind of make a big deal out of the fact that these things are like following them through the Shire, and they're sniffing a lot, and they're kind of going, I don't think they can see at all. They're just using their smell and that kind of thing. So that was kind of cool. The next kind of big thing that I noted down was when I was like, oh, I guarantee we're not going to get Arwen, we're going to get Glorfindel. And then I was like, here he comes, and what happened?
And then it was Legolas, and I said to you at the time as well, I thought it was quite cool. Like
made perfect sense.
Yeah, it made perfect sense. Like if they weren't going to have an Arwen, and if they weren't going to have Glorfindel, Legolas would be the best character to use. And if they didn't have that whole love thing going on in the Lord of the Rings, in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, which he kind of had to put in. Yeah, I'd say it would have been Legolas that came and rescued the hobbits. That would have been a really cool introduction for Legolas.
It was cool, yeah. I was like, I'm not disappointed with this at all.
I think he had one of the coolest looks as well, I want to say. I thought his face was kind of interesting and normal. Like quirky, but normal, do you know?
Yes, because it's like, again, and as we said before already, a lot of this is they use the exact same dialogue from Peter Jackson's as they use in this one, and obviously because those are parts that are lifted directly from the pages. And one of the things was when Aragorn was introduced, Frodo was like, I think the enemy would look fairer and feel fouler. And he's like, so you're saying I look foul and I feel fair, and he's proper ugly. Like,
and then Frodo was like, well, that's not exactly what I meant. Yeah.
But I was like, it's funny because that's true to this, because he's compared to like Legolas. When you said he had the best look, I was like, well, that kind of makes sense because he's an elf. He's supposed to be beautiful, whereas Aragorn Elrond then looked crap as well.
Yeah, no, I just thought Aragorn, in general, he just looked the most different compared to all the other stencils.
Yeah, he's like, he needs to just get a better haircut. Aragorn looked awful.
He did look like he kind of looked like He-Man or something from the 70s. You know, that style.
Maybe just
all leg, all arm, and a horrible like. Buzz. What's that kind of haircut? Like a bowl cut? Bowl
cut, I suppose. Yeah. But it was really bad. But then, so he did look quite foul. And then I'm kind of going, it didn't really make sense in Peter Jackson's movies where they're talking about Aragorn and like, I think the enemy would look fairer and feel fouler. And you're kind of going, how can you look fairer than Viggo Mortensen? He's stunning.
But like he's clearly like, you know,
I know he's pure dirty.
He's dirty. He's grimy. He's also, you know, in some horrible place.
I take that any day.
I take it any day. That's because we know his personality. But yeah, no Glorfindel, Legolas, and then they arrive at Rivendell, which I noted to you. I said this looks like some place in Japan.
But before we get there, even. The Nazgul chasing Frodo.
Oh God!
Remember that was the first time that I noticed. I was like, "This is way too long and unnecessary." Because also, it's kind of like you get these scenes where the Nazgul start to chase them, and there's like a normal backdrop, and then suddenly they just delete the backdrop altogether, and it's just like, you know, a filter in the back, so you can just see like it's kind of like, you know, weird flashing blues and like just nothing going on, and there's like, we're not going to put money into actually having a background in this scene. It's just going to be the images coming through, you know, just floating through space, chase each other, and it was just like, I was like, what is going on? And then that just went on for way too long, and I was like,
just basically the horse, the Nazgul and the horses stopping, Frodo stopping on his own, looking back, injured, and then them trying to call to him, then him going forward, and then looking back.
Then Asgul had this power as well. They'd always be like pointing their finger or their hand, and then Frodo would just be like, oh, and he'd collapse or something.
And then the horse just fell over randomly, and then, I don't know, got back up. It was too long. Like, they omit some huge, big things in the movie, but they keep these scenes in. So.
As we said, it was all used.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing was on the cutting board at all. Like so. And then they arrive at Japan.
And then they arrive in Japan. I was like, Rivendell's not green at all. It's just all wood. It's like a wooden Japanese decor.
Yeah,
and,
cool.
I liked it. Yeah, it was very feng shui. Then Frodo wakes up and Gandalf scolds him for all the absurd things he's done, which is a quote. He's like, and then Gandalf just goes, "You haven't even asked why I was late." And Frodo just goes, "I forgot."
Yeah, did you forget about me? And Frodo's like, "Oh yeah, why are you late?"
Which is completely the opposite of what happens in the books. In the books, he's like, "What happened, Gandalf? Why are we late?" And Gandalf's like, "Look, you're not ready for any of this. I'll tell you later." He's like, "Please tell me now. I'm not going to be able to rest until you tell me." And Gandalf's like, "No." So it was like completely the opposite. But anyway, that happened. And then it was also funny that Gandalf's like, "Look, we're going to have a council now. It's going to be great. It's going to be the Council of Elrond." And then Bilbo is like, "I guess it's up to me to save the day, as always." And they're like, no, you senile old man, you sit down. And they're like,
you've had your
Frodo must go. They like, don't say that, but they basically, order Frodo to go. And he's like, well, I guess I'll have to go. So there's no like heroic Frodo standing forward and going like, I will take. Well, I think he does that one.
It was just kind of a pure wink moment from Gandalf, and it was like, no, the ring is with Frodo now, so he must choose. And then he was just like, well, I guess I could go.
And they go through it. They rule everybody else out. Like, well, obviously it can't be him, but it can't be her. But Frodo, I mean, he's already got it in his pocket, so like, I mean, he may as well just head off now.
Yeah, so it wasn't as heroic. It was more like just happenstance that he was going to go.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of the movie is happenstance.
Oh yeah, a lot of the book as well is happenstance.
Gollum was meant to find the ring, in which case Bilbo was also meant to find it.
Yeah.
And that is an encouraging thought. So then the Doors of Durin, or the Doors of Doran, as Dave likes to call them.
The Doors of Doran, yeah.
I liked that we got to see the start of Legolas and Gimli's friendship here. And there was never, actually, now that I think about it, there was never any kind of animosity between them.
Gimli was taller than Legolas.
Gimli was huge. Big bald man.
No, there definitely was at the Council of Elrond. I think there was something exchange where no one trusted Elf, but it wasn't that. But it was something like Legolas giving a dig to Gimli. But yeah, they had a nice little even the start of that scene at the Doors of Durin. There was something where Legolas kind of said, "Oh, typical. Why would you make these secrets?" And then when Gandalf unraveled it, Gimli what did he say back to Legolas? He basically said something like, "Oh, well, we keep secrets for friends." I don't know what he said, but it was like the start of their little journey.
Well, also, they did mention something that also is from the books where, I can't remember who it was that said it, but they mentioned that at the beginning they were saying, "Oh, speak friend and enter," and then he cracks the code, and then I think he turns and goes, "Say friend and enter," which is because Gandalf initially got the translation wrong.
It was Mary that says in the book, right?
In the book, it's Merry, yeah.
But but yeah, it was nice for Legolas and Gimli. Legolas didn't say it in a snarky way. It's like, "Oh, it's say friend." Say friend. And then, and Gimli says something like, "Oh, those were better times when we could say friend." And it was something like there were better times when the elves and the dwarves were friends. That was the start of their journey into their relationship.
Days. Yeah, and then also as they're entering, Gandalf says, "There are ogre and fouler things in the deep places of the world."
Oh, he said ogre?
Or not ogre.
Older.
Or older.
You said ogre.
I think I was typing and it autocorrected to ogre, and then I just read it off the screen there without thinking about it at all.
There are ogre and fouler places.
Sorry.
Yeah,
ogre.
no. I like that version.
I was looking at my screen now, it says there are ogre. I'm like, why does it say that? And I just read it.
This is Shrek swamp that we're going into here.
I'm like Ron Burgundy. You just put it on the teleprompter, I'm going to read it. Go fuck yourself, San Diego.
And then we get the Watcher of the Water, which I also thought was quite a similar. It could have been an inspiration for Peter Jackson as well, like just tentacles and it's an inspiration from the book. But
how many tickles?
Tentacles.
Oh.
Yeah. But the worst thing, like, Bill the pony dies.
Yeah.
Kind of off screen.
Sacrifice Bill the pony.
Yeah,
like,
they were just like, let's run. And then, like, you just see a bunch of tentacles around Bill. And they're like, oh no, Bill. And then it just cuts to the next scene.
like, poor Bill.
Yeah, exactly. And then past Bill. That was crazy.
And then we get, again, one of my main complaints for this whole film, which is the lack of explanation and the lack of context for certain things. Because the next thing that I wrote down was just the mention of Mithril for the first time with no context at all. Because we already got to see it at one point when Bilbo gave Frodo his shirt.
But they don't mention it.
He doesn't mention it. He just kind of goes, here's a nice shirt for you. You should wear this underneath your other clothes. But he doesn't say it's protective. It doesn't say, it's just a shirt.
Yeah.
And so there's no mention of it whatsoever. And then here, they kind of talk about Mithril. But again, there's just no there's no linking one thing to the next. Now we're
used to that from Peter Jackson's, where Gimli's talking about Mithril, and then the camera goes to Frodo's face, and he's kind of like, ooh. And
but even at least when Bilbo gave him it, he said, this is a Mithril shirt, and he's like, it's as light as a feather, but as hard as dragon's scale. So you're kind of going, oh, it's armor. Right, okay. It's Mithril, it's armor, and then later you got Mithril, and you're like, what's really valuable? And then you see Frodo's face, and it's like, and the whole,
it just looked like a flamboyant, shiny shirt.
Yeah, and then Gandalf's like, oh, I never told Bilbo, but its worth was greater than the value of the Shire.
Yeah.
And you're like, all right, okay, well, I'm getting all this information, and it's done in a natural way. It's not just, exposition.
Yeah.
Another cool thing that they included from the books was Boromir and Frodo taking on a troll, where Boromir is like hewing at the side of the troll, and his sword just gets completely banjaxed, and we see it then for the rest of the movie. It was all just like notched, and then Frodo pulls out Sting and just stabs the troll and draws blood straight away. And so you get to see Frodo's sword Sting is, it's just like a little sword, but it's really powerful, and it can cut the hide of a troll with ease, whereas Boromir, with all his strength, Boromir was really cool as well in this. I like his design. I thought he was very cool.
Proper
very
Viking-ish.
Yeah,
very Viking.
But again, he was there with his big, huge sword, just like with these massive swings hewing at the side of the troll, and just doing zero damage at all. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of cool how they included that as well. Again, it was just literally a very small throwaway thing. But again, that's something that you could do when you don't need to include context, because it doesn't need a longer explanation.
No.
But if you've read the books, you kind of go, oh, that was cool. Whereas other things, you're kind of going, you need to explain what's going on here, guys.
Yeah.
But Balrog, Dave.
I thought the Balrog looked crazy, like some sort of sex dominatrix with a whip or something, like just cracking its whip coming out of here, like where, like, what did he have, nipple piercings? I don't know, but it seemed like in my mind, I'm like, what was that thing?
He had a butt plug.
Yeah, it was weird. Like, he kind of looked like the demon from Tenacious D as well, just like so random, and it was like, what? And he had wings.
The wings were, and then
he flew. He flew like a butterfly.
Yeah.
He was.
But his flying and the wing movements were not in sync either. It was just kind of like he just had wings, and then suddenly he just like went straight up in the air, like, with no kind of flap or anything.
Another Peter Jackson inspiration. Like it was kind of crazy.
So he had a big lion head. Yeah, and he basically just looked like a child had got a costume from some shop or something, but forgot the rest of it. Just got the head and the wings, and then the body was just kind of like not anything to do. It was just really weird.
I went into an over 18s shop as well and purchased a whip and some other red materials.
Oh no, that was really. I was just like, what is going on? Please let this end right now. But then I was like, please let it end, and immediately we just get completely cutscene transported to Lothlorien. There's no kind of like, let us head for Lothlorien. It's just like we're here now, and also it was like they ended up in space or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like it plays out pretty similarly to Jackson's, where Gandalf dies, goes down the hole, and that was kind of it. They're like, oh no, and then they end up in space. Yeah, they're in space, Lothlorien, and I thought Galadriel was pretty hot.
She was, again, giant eye, but was it Eowyn that shows up later, and they're like the exact same face?
Same
like they
face.
just had one stencil for like,
and the same outfit as well. They both just wore like a long blue dress, and I was like, oh, Galadriel / Eowyn is very hot.
Yeah. Eoladriel.
Eowyn has no lines in this movie whatsoever.
Does she not?
I didn't hear anything. I don't remember.
I was kind of checking out by that point anyway. I was kind of just, like, losing interest.
We had a few beers.
We did.
We were my notes started to get like sparser.
My notes were like when Gandalf's reading from Balin's tomb, and it's just like it's trailing off. It's like they cannot get out. yeah. The castle.
Yeah, I've plenty of notes, and so far we're only probably halfway through Peter Jackson's first movie, and so a quarter way through the story, let's say, and I have 6 more notes left.
Yeah, my notes are coming to an end as well because.
So does the interest in the movie. I think
Yeah, but then also it's just as you said, it's only halfway through Jackson's first film, which is a quarter way through what this should be, but this was probably 3/4 of the way into the film.
Yeah.
It's they really just crammed the last movie and a half into 30 minutes and really badly as well. So Lothlorien is they're in space, and also everyone's having a great time in Lothlorien. They kind of throw in the scenes that we saw in Jackson's when they've just left Rivendell, and Boromir's teaching the hobbits how to sword fight. Yeah. There's loads of different montage. Scenes. There's a little montage of them all, and they're all just living their best lives. They're having a great time. And then there's suddenly Galadriel's just standing in front of the mirror with Frodo and Sam, and she's saying would you like to look in the mirror? And they both kind of have a little, Sam and Frodo both look in the mirror, and they include that part of Galadriel's explanation of the footsteps of doom, which is something that we've talked about in a podcast before, which is where Galadriel basically says to Frodo, and the quote is in Jackson's film as well, which is "Your coming to us is as the footsteps of doom," and they kind of don't really expand on that very much in Peter Jackson's movies, but in this they did, which is saying that basically whatever happens from this point, we're doomed as an elven race on Middle Earth, basically, because if you fail and if Sauron gets the ring back, then our rings will fail, and then all that we've created, this beautiful world, we've created them with the ring.
And she showed off a little bit of Nenya as well.
She did, yeah. So she was like, if you fail, well then this ring will lose its power, but if you I'll have to take off the ring because obviously Sauron will have control over me if I don't. And if you succeed and destroy the ring, well then that will also cause this ring to lose its powers. And then, so either way, all of our heaven on earth that we've created here in Lothlorien, it's all coming to an end.
Yeah. Do you know what they should have done? They should have melted down Frodo's mithril shirt to save the elven race. Sound familiar?
It should be in the form of something circular.
Like a crown. No, smaller rings. It was quite cool. It was good.
Yeah, we all, Anyway, the less said, not the better. So Frodo, then they go off, they leave Lothlorien on their little boats, then they sail down the Anduin in the movie, and then they arrive at this little place, and Frodo's like, give me an hour to decide what to do, which I thought was kind of cool. Yeah. It was a little bit different. Obviously, they were saying it was more, the breaking of the fellowship was very different in this, and it gave a very clear explanation of why they were breaking. And I think that in Jackson's film, especially when I was younger, when Aragorn kind of says to Frodo, I would have followed you. And you must go. I was kind of I didn't understand why. And then he goes off, and the other hobbits he's leaving and all that kind of stuff. I was like, why is he leaving? Why don't they all stick together and all go a little bit further at least? I was I didn't really understand what was going on. In this one, they kind of clearly lay out, okay, well, Boromir's kind of starting to be corrupted, and then the hobbits are, they're we cannot forsake them. We've got a choice. We either follow Frodo and Sam, or we go and we try and save Merry and Pippin. And they're well, they might be dead. He's but we cannot forsake them. And then Aragorn's kind of look, Frodo and Sam, maybe they're just beyond our reach now, and maybe this is a good idea to go and try and help the hobbits. So Merry and Pippin, that is. So I thought that was quite good, the way that they kind of explained that.
Yeah, and that would be another small gripe I would have about Peter Jackson's one as well. The sense of location in that scene is not that great, because it's they're all just at the very edge at the water, and they're all having a little picnic, and then they're oh, where's Frodo? And it's who knows? And then it flashes to Frodo, and you think he's probably about 100 meters away, just strolling around. And then suddenly Boromir shows up, and they're oh, Boromir's shield is here, so he's not with us. And so Boromir and Frodo are together. But I always think they're only just a couple of meters away from everyone else. And at least in this cartoon, they say give me an hour to think. So he could be an hour's journey away. And then also the way everyone splits up, like they hear Boromir's horn, so then they run, but like Sam decides like, oh, I must find Frodo.
Yeah.
Frodo's all the way back at the boats. It's not,
and he's wearing the ring. He's invisible. There's just like this invisible. There's like it looks like an empty boat floating down the river. I thought that was cool as well.
Yeah, and just the fact that it was like
Sam just jumps into the boat, and he's like, and then Frodo takes off the ring. He's like, oh, you got me.
But it's almost like all this like chaos happens, and Frodo's like, I need to protect myself. He doesn't meet Aragorn, who says go, and he doesn't meet the other two hobbits, Merry and Pippin, that say like, he's leaving, we gotta protect him. He just goes because he's like escaping danger in that moment, and Sam is the one with a bit of knowledge to actually go, I know where he'll be.
Yeah, because Sam is running as well. They all start running, and Sam kind of goes, okay, Sam, you're... he says something like, you've got little legs, so you can't use those, you need to use your head or something. And because I think it shows Sam.
I'm surprised he didn't do a headstand and just start trying to run that way.
Yeah, just do like that fat guy in Hook, where he just like pulls his legs up to his head and just rolls down the hill. He could have done that as well, but like, because I think he started running initially with maybe, I can't remember who it was. It was Aragorn or someone beside him. They both start running, and Aragorn, whoever, just like takes off and is like miles ahead, and he's just like slowly running behind with his tiny little legs. That's what I'm saying. It was Sam
and Aragorn,
I wasn't sure if it was Aragorn or Legolas or who it was, but it was Sam and a tall person. Is what I wanted to say. So he kind of just goes, right, well, I can't be using my legs, I have to use my head, and he does well, and he goes off and he's like, where would Mr. Frodo be? One other thing as well, which was cool, was I liked the way that when Boromir kind of attacks Frodo, and then Frodo runs away, and immediately Boromir just says something like,
he repents.
He repents, but it's not just, in Jackson's, he just kind of goes, oh, sorry, I'm Frodo. He's like, what have I done? But in this, he says, a madness took me, but it has passed. And you kind of go,
but I still wasn't sure, is the audience supposed to believe him in this moment?
Oh, I think so. And I think you kind of go, oh, clearly that was the ring.
But at the same time, it's almost in the same breath where he's cursing the hobbits and all other halflings or whatever, and then he just goes, Frodo, come back, a madness took me, and now it has passed. And I'm like, I think I would have needed a few more seconds for him to say that. But I like how he immediately tells Aragorn what he's done, not when he's dying, but also when he's dying. But I did really like his talk with Frodo. I thought it was pretty cool. It seemed more smoother and less like, you see, the thing is, the other thing about Boromir in the Fellowship of the Ring is it's almost like they wanted to ramp up to that, so that when you had this one-on-one with Frodo and Boromir, you were already a little bit tense before they kind of started. You were kind of going, we know he desires the ring. So they had these little scenes, like, when Frodo falls on the mountain in the snow and the ring comes off and Boromir picks it up and he's like looking at it, and you can see he's desiring the ring from an early point. I think in this movie, you only see Boromir being heroic. And, he comes out and he like cuts a few tentacles off the Watcher in the Water, and he's like really heroic in different moments, and he's fighting everyone, and he's just a badass warrior. And then this is the first moment, and he comes and he tries to have like a very, man-to-man plea with Frodo, and he goes like, look, this will be my counsel, and this is what I think we should do. He says like, let me borrow it, bring it to the city, and then maybe you can take it on from there. Like it doesn't seem like in Peter Jackson's one, he's kind of like,
I want it for myself.
Yeah, I want it. Can I take it and use it for my people? Whereas this, he's like, come with me to Minas Tirith, to Minas Tirith. And then like,
we'll go together.
We'll go together, and then you can take it on from there. It seemed quite reasonable. I was like, I'd nearly go with him.
It was like he was saying, we'll go off on a little side quest on our own, just the two of us. These guys can keep doing what they want, and then just you and me, we'll go on a little duo.
And also, he talks about like, how it could corrupt people, but not like the sturdiest of men. But I love how he talked up Aragorn. He's like, can you imagine Aragorn? He says something like the true rightful king of Gondor, if this was in his possession. Like, he said something like that, and I was like, oh, that's really cool, because obviously there's supposed to be a little bit of animosity between the two characters in Peter Jackson's. And he says like, we've no need for these rings of power. The only reason we would need it is to defend ourselves or something, or defend our kingdoms or something. I thought it was like quite a good speech, and I enjoyed that scene.
I think that if you watch this movie and you watch Peter Jackson's movie, just The Fellowship of the Ring, you'd probably like the character of Boromir more from this one rather than, because I think a lot of people come away from The Fellowship of the Ring, Peter Jackson's one, and they kind of think, oh, he's the villain, and I that's one thing I don't like about it. I love the film.
Well, we obviously love that Sean Bean's portrayal as well.
Absolutely love Sean Bean. And
I know it's kind of understood to be kind of a grey character until the end, when he finally
he repents, and he kind of is.
And his death in this was kind of weird, but like, and there was no music when he was dying in this.
Music, man.
But he was still a hero.
He was, and he took about 17 arrows to the chest. They just kept shooting him nonstop.
He was pierced by many. But yeah, we talked about how we kind of enjoyed the scene, and I think this was probably one of the last scenes I enjoyed in the movie.
Yeah, it was very good. I did like it, but like again, as you just said a moment ago, no music, and I think that when you're watching Peter Jackson's and just what Howard Shore did to like just bring this movie up to like the upper echelons of movies, it's just the music is incredible, and the music in this was woeful. I was gonna say, yeah. Anyway, moving on, we see Merry and Pippin get taken by the orcs, and instead of the orc carrying them, they're just like running along. It's like they're all running in a party. But then, and I was like, oh, that looks kind of like they're happy to be there. But then it did zoom in, and they're like their hands are bound, and they were like crying. So I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. They're just making them run. It even makes more sense than rather than having to carry these packages. Yeah. But I suppose, obviously, in reality, they wouldn't have been able to run as fast as the Uruk-hai. There was something I made a quote here. I don't even remember what it was, but I wrote it down, and it says bed and breakfast in Isengard. I think
I wrote down.
I think this is almost like the meat's back on the menu kind of thing.
I wrote that. I said Peter Jackson has menus for the orcs, whereas Ralph Bakshi has B&Bs.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't remember what the context was.
It was because basically, well, it was Merry and Pippin.
They were sleeping rough.
They said something like, "Oh, I hope we get a bed and breakfast in Isengard," or something, and then one of the orcs goes, "Oh, you far from bed and breakfast," and I was like, "That's so weird hearing him say bed and breakfast," and Peter Jackson's guy saying menus in the same scene. Like it's the same scene. Where
it's the same part of the film. Yeah, exactly. And then we get the Rohirrim. They show up, and then there's a bit of a standoff with these orcs. And do you remember? It was weird. It was like
it's like a siege kind of.
Yeah, but it's weird. It's like the Rohirrim are arriving, and then every now and again you just see one guy going across the screen on his horse and shooting an arrow, and it would just kill one orc. And then, but it was like they were just facing off, and they were standing about 100 meters apart, and nobody was doing anything. And I was like, what's going on?
No, there was no explanation about that at all. As well.
And again, it was another part where this is one of the parts where it starts to just unravel, and kind of again we get all these characters. Maybe that's what they were saying. What I was saying at the start, where they were like lauding the use of rotoscope so they could get all these characters on screen at the same time. But it just meant that they just completely cut out the backdrop. And there was no background at all. There was
I couldn't see what was going on.
It was like they were just in space. They might just put like a big red background or like blue or green or something. But there was no like images, which was just really, really weird.
We also get that little scene that we mentioned earlier where the trio of Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli running through the wilderness, and Aragorn, whoever was rotoscoping Aragorn, obviously that actor tripped over the sheath of his sword, because I actually went back and watched it today.
Did you?
And yeah, like you kind of see in slow motion he's running and his sword gets like in between his two legs and he just clips it and just completely falls over, and there's no way they would have animated that in. It's clearly like that's somebody's
what happened,
real movement, and they're like, let's keep it. Nothing went to the cutting floor.
Oh my god, yeah, it's so funny. Like can you imagine an actor doing a scene where like, and you need to run from this point to that point, like, and action, and he runs, he just trips over his lace and something happened to, and they're like, okay, instead of just doing that again, they're like, we'll just use it. Next scene. It's like moving on. You're like, what? Didn't make any sense.
We get a brief look as well at, as you called him, ballsack Gollum.
I said ballsack head, yeah.
Yeah, he looked...
His head did look like a ballsack.
I would say he looks a lot better than the Rankin Bass, like frog Gollum.
Well, that's not hard either. That was awful.
That was awful. And I thought he talked, like the way he spoke was quite cool.
Yeah,
not similar to the way Andy Serkis does it, but like obviously lifted straight from the book. He does use a bit of gurgly sounds, just like, yes, precious, yeah, we must do that, like that kind of way.
He was, I initially was like, what is this? But I didn't hate it. It was okay. It was all right.
It was grand. And that's that.
And that's that. Moving on, and then we get Treebeard, which we already mentioned. Yeah. He looked like a big turnip or a carrot or something.
Turnip beard.
It was literally a 30-second sequence where he just shows up. He's walking. Again, this is the part where my memory is not great now, where I'm trying to remember what actually happened. But it's just, was there any explanation of, they were in the forest and they hear some noises or something, and then suddenly,
and then they go, and then he picks them up.
He's just carrying them the next scene, and they're talking, and he's like, oh, how are you lads?
Yeah. No, that was kind of random. You're not saying.
And he was like, I am a tree herder, and you're kind of going, all right. And then they go to then Gandalf just shows up and he has his return again, kind of cool. He's like hiding his appearance. He's like
Gandalf looks pretty cool.
Big reveal. He's like, who's going to be behind door A? And it's like, it's Gandalf. And
by the way, they did that. Like Gandalf gave his little flashback of like what happened to him.
Yeah, he explained,
and that was pretty cool. And also, they just had still images of artwork. It was almost like storyboard.
Yeah,
and the Balrog looked class.
Yeah, looked way better.
Why didn't they use that? Like, pick that
even
that
to do that same thing the first time. Like, just not even have animation, just have storyboards and just like flashing images.
Yeah.
Which was a cool kind of technique as well, which I definitely enjoyed that version of his fight with the Balrog.
Yeah, so Gandalf came back and that was fine.
Gandalf came back, it was great, and then they went to Edoras, or Edoras.
Did they even, I know they mentioned it, but like it seemed like all those scenes,
they mentioned it, and then they went, and suddenly they were in the Golden Hall. Do you remember when Grima was there?
No, I remember that, but like it seemed like that all kind of took place in Helm's Deep. Do you know? I don't think so.
No,
but this is the thing. Like I was trying to see, is that Helm's Deep or Edoras? Because like they were talking about Edoras, but then they said, and there's another stronghold, Helm's Deep, that we must go there. And they didn't show any difference of like changing from one to the other.
No, they didn't. No.
But like I just thought like that could have been actually a smart move if you needed to cut stuff out, cut out all the Edoras stuff, and just pretend.
This all happens in Helm's Deep. Yeah, maybe. But like again, as we said, there was no explanation of where they were at any given moment, so we don't really know. But again, maybe it's not the end of the world. It's not a huge important thing for the plot if they have that speech with, again, Theoden. The other thing about, we are introduced to Theoden in this moment anyway, and we're not sure if it happens in Helm's Deep or in Edoras. But anyway, he's there with Grima. Grima was a weird looking character.
Yeah, similar to the book.
But But Theoden didn't seem to be under any sort of a spell or anything. He was just kind of...
Just under his advice.
Really, I suppose. Again, maybe... I prefer Peter Jackson's idea.
Oh, yeah. I don't think there's anything...
And then Theoden, seemed to be pure sound to Grima as well.
Kind of similar to...
Again, quite similar to the books.
Yeah.
Again, from Peter Jackson's, he comes out of the spell, he tries to murder Grima straight away. So that's not true to the books, really, I don't think. But again, as you said, then there was just a mention of Helm's Deep. There's no build up or explanation or anything of what's going on. You're just kind of going,
suddenly there.
We're here. The armies are attacking, and then
Yeah, my only note was Helm's Deep, and the ending was chaotic, and it just was like the whole end of the movie. The very end was just
like when they ride out.
Everything. Like I'm not even going to begin to try and describe or recap what happened. It was just a mess, and it wasn't enjoyable. It's just weird.
But again, so then we see Gandalf coming back, which is the first moment he comes back, and he explains everything that happened to Balrog. And then all this stuff just happens. We meet Theoden, we meet all these people. We never see Gandalf just be like, I gotta head off for a while. He's just not mentioned. There. And then suddenly he has this return, at the there's no on the third day, to my coming or whatever. Or on the fifth day. So we never get that or anything. And then there's no reason for him to arrive when he does. And when he does arrive, he arrives with 5 people. And you're kind of going
and all the orcs scatter.
Yeah, and they all just run away. But also, Theoden's to Aragorn, ride out with me. And I'm like, okay, cool, that's going to happen. And then they ride out. And they just do fine on their own. They don't even need Gandalf.
They don't need Gandalf and his 5 other men.
And then eventually Gandalf comes and they're like, all right, well, I suppose that's happening now. But... Then we also get to see Frodo and Sam. They head for the secret path, and yeah. Anything you want to say about that?
No, not really. I thought the ending, like how I mentioned at the beginning, was kind of similar to the Holy Grail. How it just kind of it felt like there could be so much more that you could talk about, or the third book was going to come into play, or whatever. But then there was just this triumphant music that just kind of finished it off, and it was I suppose that's the end.
We'll wrap it up there.
Yeah, that's good.
That's a good day's work.
Just like the end of this podcast episode, it's I think that's good. That's good.
And cut.
I just thought it was a kind of a weird ending, and at that point we were a good 8 beers deep, and we were just right, let's finish this
for one day.
Overall thoughts. Not good.
Would not watch again.
Yeah. Glad we watched it. Wouldn't watch again.
Yeah, I am glad that I watched it. And as I said, there was a good 60% of the movie that I quite enjoyed. Not that I was this is great, I'm going to watch it again. But I was this is a lot better than I expected. But just they really dropped the ball towards the end of it. Yeah. And it was this is, what could have been an okay average movie just really went downhill because of the last few scenes. And... just the messiness of it. And as we said, the lack of explanation, the lack of just coherent scene to scene. This is why we're going here, and this is what's going on. That was just really, overlooked and brushed over. So they kind of like, you just lack that connectivity from one scene to the next.
Yeah, I think I also think that it would be hard to do a cartoon version of the Lord of the Rings in such an epic way. So I think all of the scenes in the first half of the movie especially were done quite well. But then because that can be kind of childlike and fun, but then how do you do all the epic battles and stuff and keep it childlike? I don't know. I think Rankin Bass did a much better job, even though it wasn't a good job.
Yeah, well,
I just think it's hard to do.
It is hard to do, but I think at least Rankin Bass, he just was like, okay, this is my animation style, and it's going to be consistent.
The style messed everything up.
Yeah, exactly. Just the lack of consistency with the style was just so, like, you're watching something and you're kind of going, oh, I'm getting into these characters and this, like, whatever, this dialogue. And then suddenly there's just this wild, crazy animation that's kind of mixed of, you're watching something animated and you just see some, like, human faces that are so, like, almost like photoreal. And you're kind of going, what the hell's going on here? Like,
yeah. Well, it was a crazy time, the 70s. It was
weird.
A coked up, weed infested period of time, and like you can clearly see that translated on the screen.
Probably LSD was involved as well.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah.
So yeah, I think I don't really have any other thoughts on it.
No, and I hope I never do again.
I'm never going to think about this ever again. So that'll do for today, guys. I hope that we've given you some insight into this, and if you do want to go and watch this movie,
don't. Listen to the podcast.
Yeah, as we said from the beginning, we watched it so that you don't have to. But, I mean, you still can, and it is still quite enjoyable. If you are into funny cigarettes or things like that, maybe you can have something like that to keep you going and to keep your interest. But, as I said, it's a bit weird. It's a bit all over the place. But again, it's a kind of a good snapshot of the late 70s and what was going on back then. So,
and like I said at the beginning, I think it's worth watching for a Tolkien fan just to have that comparison or just to have it under the belt. So, it's not a good movie, but at least I've seen all of the adaptations, and it is, especially the start of the movie, it's interesting to see some differences, like the 17-year age gap and the 17-year time gap.
You can even just watch the first half of the movie, then just turn it off.
And then that was after Boromir dies, like I say, turn it off.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
But yeah,
so that's good. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Obviously, please like and subscribe and all those good things. And from Dave and myself, we'll see you on the next one.